Today we have a malicious compliance story that goes back to the mid-90s involving rollerblading. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, because I missed the bus, I have to walk to school? So be it. I was reminded by this post about an event that happened when I was far too young to be on my own. I didn't expect this to be this long, but writing it has been a little cathartic. Some setup of the scene, this would have been back in the mid-1970s. I was in elementary school. I don't remember what grade or age, but that school was 1st through 3rd, so I was somewhere between 5 and 8 years old. Although I remember starting to dislike school because of being bullied by classmates in 2nd grade, so it was more likely 2nd or 3rd grade, age 6 to 7. I was expected to do my morning routine, get up, dressed, breakfast, and walk to the bus stop entirely on my own. The bus stop was about 500 feet or 1/10 of a mile away, and around a sharp corner at the end of the route. This meant that while there was a chance I could see the bus go by if I was running late and on my way, but because of the angles involved, there was the little chance the driver could see me if I was late, so they wouldn't know to stop and wait for me. I don't remember if I was dragging my feet or just got up late that morning, but by the time I got to the bus stop that morning, it was too late. The bus had come and gone without me. In the past, when this happened, I'd sadly walk back home, tell my mother, and she'd drive me in. But for some reason this morning she decided that it wasn't happening. I don't know if she was trying to teach me a lesson or just had enough or what, but she told me I had to walk. No, she wouldn't be coming with me. A young girl, about 6 or 7, walking about a 2-mile route alone. I was terrified. There were a few sidewalks, mostly just dirt paths worked into the side of the road, if that. Plus, due to the elements that I now know are not good for a child to go through, by this time, I definitely had issues doing anything wrong in the eyes of adults around me, so I had this additional fear of anyone seeing me on this walk of shame. So I made sure no one saw me. If I saw any vehicle coming, I'd hide. I couldn't handle the thought of anyone witnessing this. I walked and walked and walked. It felt like forever, but I walked the entire way, and I finally got there and walked into the office to report my tardiness. It turns out that my mother had not intended me to actually do that. She had called the school to have someone come and meet me on the route. Not that she said anything about this to me. The bus driver had gotten back into her bus and drove the route they thought I'd have taken. And then when they didn't see me, she got into her personal car and did it again and again, trying to find me. Multiple people were sent out to look for me, but again, in my mind, I couldn't allow anyone to see me in this shame. Plus, I was old enough to know about stranger danger and was scared about that too. I absolutely was not going to let anyone find me. I think they were actually on the phone with the police when I walked in the office door. As for the fallout, I'm sorry, but I can only speculate based on other memories. My mother would have been chastised by the school for not telling me to expect someone to be looking for me to offer a ride. I would have then been punished, yelled at, spanked, grounded, because mother could never handle being wrong, so it had to be my fault. I don't remember ever having to do it again though. Man, that is so unfair and uncool that after all this, going through an experience that I would say has a high degree of potentially traumatizing you, it sure does suck that after all that, the mom tried to drill into OP's head that they were in the wrong still. Our next story is, neighbor tries to flex, gets the shaft instead. Spec home build with a $12 million budget and a 16-month schedule. Next door neighbor immediately qualifies as a complete D-head, knows everybody including the principals of the company I work for. At the very beginning of the work, he asks for a row of redwood trees to be planted as screening between the properties. Principals grant his request as a good neighbor gesture, $31,000. Every step of the project, he either stands out at the end of the drive taking pictures, or he's flying his drone over the lot. He starts asking questions about whether or not work in progress is covered under the permit. He confides that he obtained a copy of the permit and a set of plans. One day, he asks us for a meeting to discuss the redwood trees. Yes, those trees. He comes over at the appointed time and introduces his wife's landscape architect. Famous guy apparently, and he tried pulling some muscle moves by trying to convince us that the redwood trees are stealing their water. They also don't fit his vision for the project they're considering, which will be a total side and backyard makeover, with walkways, stone walls, fountains, etc. He wants mature oak trees instead. Cut down and remove the redwoods at our expense and plant new oak trees. Also at our expense because, screening. We decline, which sends famous architect guy and the wife into a rage. They decide to move forward with their project anyway, and the major earth moving, concrete forming, irrigation, etc. are all getting placed. Mr. Drone Guy continues to make efforts to get the oak trees swapped in, under threats that maybe some of the work we're doing isn't covered under the permit. Seems he also acted as the GC for his own remodel, so he must really know what he's talking about. He sends emails, registered letters from his lawyer, all in an effort to get us to swap out the trees. Finally, we are within sight of completing our project, and from the second floor, we can see that they have really transformed their whole yard into little parklets with mature plantings and walkways and all the other stuff. It's impressive. So I call the town for a courtesy inspection prior to final, and the next day the inspector, an old friend whose father is also an old friend, stops by to tour the property for any red flags. I save the best for last, and we make it upstairs and make it to the best possible viewing point of the neighbor's magnificent landscape project. And my inspector friend casually but loudly says, "What the heck is all that? I never saw a permit come through for all that." And he bounds downstairs and heads back to the office, I'm guessing to pull files. Here comes the best part. Through abutting property searches that we always perform as due diligence, we discovered that the neighbor's side yard in its entirety is an 80-foot wide utility easement for the single largest underground water aqueduct for the entire region. Can't be built on. We kept mum. Now, because there's also a seasonal creek that crosses said easement, Fish and Game are now notified of the work in progress. In addition, we now have the State Water Resources Board, along with the major water utility company inspections and enforcement department, making inquiries along with the town building department. No permit application was ever submitted for any of the work Mr. Drone Guy had done. Oof. Our property sold, and during some modifications for the new owner, we watched with subdued glee as every stick and stone was removed from the offending area and was left to be in a natural state for eternity. Major fines were also levied. If only we could know how major these fines that were levied actually were. But I'm gonna assume going and doing this that violates multiple different official departments, it probably was a very costly mistake. Thanks, Mr. Drone Guy. I wonder if he tried to use his reputation to muscle out of those fines. Probably just ran for the hills and cut off those people that he screwed over. Our next story is cutting back on overtime in a field where urgent response is the norm? You'll pay for it. I work in a field where urgent response is the entire purpose. My employer became suddenly budget conscious, which led to them becoming much more stringent about our frequent overtime. We were told that all scheduled overtime had to be approved. Cool, no issue there. However, when it came to unscheduled overtime, which is where the bulk of overtime came from, the problem arose. Any unscheduled overtime would be reviewed after the fact. If it was determined that overtime wasn't justified, we could either be faced being forced to take comp time within the same pay period so that the extra time would be negated, or they would attempt to not pay or claw back money, which is illegal. Cue malicious compliance in two ways. I tend to work earlier hours than our main office, so it's not uncommon for me to get phone calls once I've returned home. Normally not a big deal. I handle the call and go about my day. Most times, because it's only a few minutes, I don't even request the overtime pay. This all changed once the policy went into effect. The very first day under the new rules, I received a call from our main office about 10 minutes after I got home. I answered the phone by stating, "Hello, my workday ended 10 minutes ago. Would you like for me to continue this call on overtime, or can this be dealt with tomorrow?" The response was, "No overtime, this will only take a minute." I ultimately ended the call and dealt with the issue the following day. This occurred about a half dozen times over the span of a few days. I really made my point on this one. I received a phone call after hours that I was needed for an urgent, not emergent, I wouldn't have jeopardized anything to make a point, response. I listened to the details of what was occurring and informed my supervisor that I'd be happy to get on the road. Just as soon as they'd send me an email stating that an after-hours response was required and overtime for the night was authorized. Nothing crazy, just a sentence or two. The response I got was, "Just get on the road, I'll send you an email later or tomorrow." But I refused. I informed them that I was off duty, and they could either send me the email as requested so I'd be covered, or they could have someone from outside my territory respond in my place, which would have delayed the response over an hour. This back and forth continued for about 3 to 4 minutes until they relented and sent me an email, which I received in about 30 seconds, before I'd even had the chance to use the restroom or grab my keys. My points, along with my coworkers who took similar actions, were made. Our leadership only pressed forward with requiring approval for pre-scheduled overtime, and even that's gone by the wayside. Now, to be fair, if I was working in a place that regularly had overtime, it's one thing to deal with it and help out. But when the company makes it so incredibly frustrating or even financially stupid to do the overtime, you're definitely not going to catch me probably even picking up the phone. Our next story is 1995. Mom says, "Do not ever rollerblade in my house again." I have a short and funny story for you all to chuckle at my mom and dad's expense. So let's set the stage. I'm 5 years old. We had just moved to a new home in a nice area that my parents were proud to own a home in and happy to send me to good schools there. It's summertime, and the first couple of weeks of summer, I'd been on a big rollerblading kick, as your typical 5-year-old in the 1990s. At one point, I'd been playing with friends and came inside with my rollerblades on to get a drink of water and grab a snack. My mom promptly loses her crap and says, "Look at my floors, your rollerblades made marks all over them." They were easily cleaned up, nothing permanent or staining. She then exclaims, "Never rollerblade in the house, and do not come into this house with the rollerblades on ever again." 5-year-old me was scared. My old man was an all-American collegiate wrestler, so I sure as heck did not want dad to come home ticked at me after mom calls his Nokia brick cell phone to say how I've been misbehaving and ask that he handles it when he got home from work. Fast forward about 3 weeks, my grandma's babysitting me, and I'm outside playing in my rollerblades in the neighboring cul-de-sac. The urge to poop has been weighing on me for a little bit, but I was holding it in and rollerblading for as long as possible, like a typical 5-year-old kid that's having fun. A few more minutes pass, and I gotta go, like right now. I rollerblade back to the house and go into the garage, and as I'm about to open the door into the house, I recall my mom's strong-worded demand to not enter the house with rollerblades on ever again. I quickly rollerblade down the concrete path next to the garage into the backyard. I gotta go right now. I start to go towards the grass, but I'm overwhelmed while crossing the backyard's wooden deck. I drop my shorts right there, squat down, rollerblades still on, and push out a huge one right there in the middle of the backyard deck, which was extended out from the house. The poo is standing straight up from the floor of the patio, and as I look around, I see my next door neighbors in the backyard grilling out, cackling at what they had just witnessed. My mom was quite unhappy when she got home about an hour later. She ended up having to clean up my you-know-what off the deck, gagging and swearing the entire time. Needless to say, she was seriously embarrassed that the neighbors saw, ticked she had to clean it up, and decided that under certain emergency situations, I could rollerblade in the house to avoid any neighborhood-wide embarrassment on her end. I at least lived some of my life in the 90s, and I gotta say, maybe not exactly still in the 90s, but right around the turn of the millennium, there was definitely a period in my life where I enjoyed roller skating quite a bit. I would just have these roller skates, and I had a sidewalk in my neighborhood, so I would just roll right up and down the whole neighborhood. I never really actually went anywhere or did anything, but I look back and I still remember how much fun rollerblading was, and I don't really understand why it kind of fell off. I think I remember hearing Bill Burr say that everybody just got unreasonably homophobic for some reason about rollerblading, and therefore no longer in fashion. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely awesome malicious compliance story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.